Thank you, everybody. A very good afternoon. Special thanks to the panelists of today, Marten van Dijk, Herbert Bos, without a C and an H, Max Schulze, Pallas Agterberg, and Sven Fisher. The topic we are going to discuss today has to do with secure, autonomous, and sustainable cloud, because virtually everyone works in the cloud these days. We don't have to tell you that. But that also means that the data ends up with mostly large foreign tech companies. And in addition, there are still quite a few things that go wrong with the security of data stored in the cloud. And therefore, there are scientists, for example, from the Netherlands, that want to build a secure and autonomous cloud. But what are the key challenges for such a cloud? And how can we, at the same time, make cloud computing more sustainable as well? Well, in this session, we have participants from both the private sector, academia, and even an alliance that aim to contribute to secure, autonomous, and more sustainable cloud solutions. The agenda of this session is as follows. First, we have a digital walk-in that just happened. The introduction of the team I just did, and now we're going to introduce the participants. After that, we're going to discuss a key challenge for creating a secure, autonomous, and sustainable cloud. We will do a round first, and then we can have a discussion. And you are participants, so you can also chat. You can add elements to the discussion through the chat. So we encourage you also to do that. And afterwards, we're also going to take into account your questions and have another round. But first, I just briefly want to give the floor to the participants to introduce themselves. And I will start with Herbert Bos, without CH. And now I stop telling that. Can you briefly introduce yourself and what your relation is to the topic? I'm very curious.
Yep. So thank you. So Herbert Bos, I'm a professor at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, where I co-lead the VUSAC System Security Research Group. So we are a research group in the area of systems and security. That is the lower level parts of the stack that includes everything that's close to the hardware. And what made me interested in this is that what we currently lack in any computing platform is foundations for security. So what we've seen in recent years is that all the low levels of the stack, the hardware software stack, turns out to be much less trustworthy than we expected. So that's why I was interested in seeing whether we can maybe push something in this direction, because it will enable a lot of activities that are currently impossible.
Thank you, Herbert. I'll stay with the scientists, so I'll give the floor to Marten van Dijk.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marten van Dijk. I'm a group lead of computer security at CWI. As a researcher, I've been working on secure computation pretty much all my career, ranging from secure processor architectures to actually more foundational hardware security topics, but also things like fully homomorphic encryption, where you use pure crypto to actually to do secure computation and so on. So that's my background, and I'm just like Herbert. We want to see how we can bring rigorous style, say, cryptographic thinking to security engineering. So how can we bring security by design into a cloud infrastructure? That does not mean, adding filters, adding encryption. That's all an afterthought. It's all add-on. You want to, at the core, at the start, at the foundation, work on how security influences your design. I will come to a challenge around this later on.
Thank you, Marten. Pallas, may I give you the floor? Pallas Agterberg.
Yes, well, Pallas, I'm working on challenges in the energy system, not only the production of energy, but most of it, the usage of it. And that can be in industry or in built environment. But today, of course, it is about the digital part. And I have been working in several elements of this, including the LEAP initiative, where we try to find a way of getting the digital industry as a part of the solution of the energy system instead of big part of the chunk of issues that we have right now. And another part is that I, in the strategic team of the AI coalition in the Netherlands, especially on the data part, and some other things, including somewhere on food and health. So yeah, I'm very interested in this discussion.
Thank you very much, Pallas. I will give the floor to Max Schulze, to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for having me as well. I will keep it short. My name is Max Schulze. I'm obviously, based on my name, with an SCH. I'm German, but I live in the Netherlands now for quite some time. I'm the CEO and founder of the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance, long name. We call it SDA most of the time, which recently merged in the Netherlands also with Green IT Amsterdam, to build an organization basically that advocates for sustainable digital infrastructure. And what I think is always important is that the word sustainability has become a synonym for green and energy efficient. I want to just put a reminder that it means balancing environment, economics, and society, and not just green. And that's, if we talk about sustainable cloud, so to say, I look at it from these three aspects, not just from its environmental footprint, so to say. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Max. And then I'll give the floor to Sven Fisher.
Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Sven Fisher. I'm the co-founder of the CISO Group. We are the owner of several hosting cloud companies. One of them is the Fuka.cloud, which is a OpenStack-based cloud in the Netherlands and in Frankfurt. And I'm also chairman of the Dutch cloud community and chairman of the Digital Infrastructure Coalition in the Netherlands.
Oh, thank you, Sven. And maybe we keep the floor with you, because can you tell me from your perspective, we've seen multiple efforts to create a secure, autonomous, and also sustainable cloud in the Netherlands, in Europe, with Gaia X. You probably know about these initiatives, but it hasn't really been flying yet, like we would like to see. What from your perspective is the biggest challenge that we have to solve in order to create a secure, autonomous, sustainable cloud?
In short, there is no demand. The people listening and the people here have demand, but there is no global market demand. In the Netherlands, we see it even most companies in the Netherlands will use something like Microsoft or Amazon or Google. So for us as a company to build our own cloud, we first need the demand, and then we even need, for the secure, we need more demand, because I'm not private. I'm privately financed by myself, so that's very. It's a non-technical issue basically for us as the private sector.
Would be very interesting to have the academic sector react to that. Marten van Dijk, from your perspective, what is the biggest challenge?
Well, you called out, for example, Gaia X, but Gaia X is not a secure cloud, right? It's just an application layer with a data structure that explains what can be shared and what cannot be shared among other participants. But it has nothing to do with an underlying secure platform. But to follow up on Sven's remark, exactly, even in my own investigations across the last year with departments in the Netherlands, there is no interest, I would say, in funding security because there's no immediate economic growth. And so one main challenge is really to educate the society at large and the political system that if you want to safeguard our current economic welfare, we need to make sure that it cannot be jeopardized by incredible attacks or creating an environment where it is better for companies to go out of the Netherlands to go to a more safe, secure infrastructure elsewhere. In other words, such investment is then needed, but can only be pushed really through a larger economic, not economic, but larger social, political drive that recognizes that if you want to safeguard our culture, we need to put some tax money against it. Now, if we would have the money, what kind of technical challenges would we then have? Well, we cannot build a cloud from scratch, right? That's crazy. Of course not. What we got to do is we got to work with open source available cloud systems. I've myself worked with OpenStack somewhat, but there are other solutions. And also their security was not by design to begin with. What is possible, though, is then to maybe isolate certain modules that can be replaced with modules that have that in mind, and other modules that enhance the security in that larger system. So stepwise, we may be able to come to a better solution. And in this whole spectrum, obviously, what is very important is to realize that not everybody needs security, but they still want to use your cloud. So clearly, they do not want to pay the cost necessarily for a slower, computation. So you will need to find a balance. You need to find a possibility for a system that allows you to trade off security with respect to performance, essentially on demand from the client perspective.
Thank you, Martin, for these points. And just I mentioned GaiaX in the terms of related to the autonomy efforts of the European Union, but you're very correct in your comments. So thank you for that. Max, what do you think is the biggest challenge for us?
That's a challenging question itself. I wrote some notes. I think to take maybe a different angle aside from the technical side. I think we have to recognize that humans are pain avoidance machines, right? So we talk about demand, we talk about cloud, let's talk about people. Who's buying cloud capacity? It's people who buy cloud capacity. What do they want? They want convenience. And they would choose, there's studies all over the world that show you that convenience will always be chosen over everything. And the cloud, most cloud providers, the way they are designed today, they're really there to maximize the convenience of the developer, who's the ultimate buyer of this product. That's one aspect. I think we have to design, if we want a European cloud, we have to design something that's more convenient and more compelling as a proposition. The second point is a competitive market. So if you have cloud providers of the size that we have today, it's very difficult to compete with their measures of lowering the bar of entry. So what do I mean? If AWS hands out 100,000 euros of free computation for every startup, that's very difficult to compete for Sven, right? How is he going to sponsor 10 million euros or 100 million euros worth of free compute just to hope that one of these customers will turn into a paying one? That's a very expensive bet. And all these measures, there's a lot more that are all are about reducing the barrier to entry to basically experience convenience. And once you're in, you're hooked. And I think Europe's approach so far has been government needs to take action and we need to defend ourselves. I think that's a very angry response at the realization that we missed something. And then we want somebody to defend, so to say, the fact that we missed something, because ultimately the cloud is a better infrastructure solution for the digital world. And I think we should focus on how do we create the next evolution of that, rather than trying to figure out how to push them out of Europe, so to say, through regulation or through, let's say, decisive action on a sovereignty or security basis. We should just out-innovate them. And I think Europe can do that. We've always done that, and we need to focus on that. That would be my pitch to your question.
Thanks, Max. Pallas.
Well, I think it's quite confusing to talk about the cloud, because what is it that you are actually meaning? And when I look at this data center issue, let's point out the sustainability part, but it's okay. the solutions for the security is more or less the same. If you look at the sustainability part, then we see that the claim of the digital sector is that we need to grow without having extra energy usage. So efficiency is the only one that counts. And because of the efficiency, we get hyper and hyperscaling, which means that the largest hyperscales that we see coming to the network right now are as much as the same demand for capacity on energy as a city like Amsterdam. And we have numbers of them coming up to it. So this is a way like scaling up from a single perspective. And this single perspective thinking, this hyper focus creates the problem in all kind of way. And first, if you hear Sven, then he says, I have no demand, I have no markets, I'm not paying customers for the coming next years. So if we want to look at this, we need to zoom out and say, okay, what's happening? We use the word cloud for almost everything. We put them in hyperscale data centers, which are more or less facility centers where you can have your own server within a hyperscale. And we all know that in the coming years, a lot of things will change. For instance, this extra requirements from policy levels in terms of security and where the data are, etc. We know that a lot of AI will be developed, and AI, as for now, has always been for put all your data in a container, and then we can make all the machine learning things, and we put them somewhere in a data center, and then this is all going to change. So we need to not look at cloud as a whole, but to specific services with specific requirements, and on some of them, security will be the most important, not today, but in a few years. And we need to come up with a solution. For instance, this call, me talking to you, can be fake in a few years without you even noticing it. So after that happened a few times, security will be, in this specific example, authenticity of who's talking or where the data is coming from will be part of it. So we need to break down cloud into cloud services with specific requirements and all kind of metadata in authentications in order to make it happen. And I'm giving it over to Herbert. He said, and that's not just on the software level, it's not just on the data level, it goes right into the machine. So now I'm curious how that will work.
Is it my turn now?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, so what are the major challenges? And I think we've heard some of the best arguments there, right? So there's no demand, Sven said, and what sells is convenience and efficiency, and I think that's all absolutely true. But it's important to realize that our view of the world is shaped by what is currently there, right? So this is the way things are organized at the moment, and I think there's more than just the demand that is currently there for convenience, efficiency, and the lack of incentive for people like Sven to change their way of doing business, which is clearly there is no incentive at the moment, but there could be. Right, so it doesn't mean that the world needs to be organized as it's organized now. If we have different types of regulation, for instance, that provides an incentive to Sven to really work on something foundationally secure in order to do business in this country for certain types of data, then he would be forced to change. We've seen this with GDPR. We've seen this with other types of EU regulations also. So I think the major obstacle, as all of I think the other panelists have also indicated, is the lack of incentive for change. And I'm not saying that this needs to be regulated per se by the EU, but I'm just saying that there are possibilities for moving in a certain direction. One country, which I will not uphold as a shiny example, but where things are moving in that direction, is, for instance, China, where they say, look, guys, whatever you're doing, if it's related to anything sensitive, you have to move it out of the public commercial clouds and into a state-run cloud. I'm not saying this is the solution. I'm just saying that they will actually take this regulation very, very seriously, right? So even the Chinese companies such as Alibaba and Tencent can host any of this in some of the major cities in China, host any of the data that is related to the state. So another major obstacle that I see is in Europe, and certainly in the Netherlands, we are extremely averse to risk. There is this famous Italian cartoon series called Calimero, whose a major attitude was I'm too small, right? I'm too small to do anything, and we have embraced that in this country. Whenever you say anything that requires ambition, the attitude is always, we can't do that here in this country. It needs to be done by Europe, and that in itself may well be true, right? So, but it also typically becomes then an attitude of, actually, let's not worry about this, right? We're not going to push this in Europe. We'll just wait for others to pick this up, and then it could be something like Gaia X, which is not providing what we're demanding. It's only some standards for storing data and exchanging data, and it's not providing this secure cloud. So there's the lack of incentives, which I think we need to think about, right? So it need not to just be government regulation. Maybe there are other types of incentives, and there's the lack of this entrepreneurial spirit for let's change the world. That I think is that are two of the most difficult challenges to overcome. The technical challenges, I believe that they require a lot of thought, but we will be able to handle those.
Okay, thank you very much, Herbert. Great to see that the technical challenges will be solved. So that's good news. We have in this panel discussion. I also encourage the participants to, if you have any questions, to just post them in the chat box, and we will take them into account. Well, let's continue with the incentives, because that was a sort of common denominator in all the kickoffs of the participants. Who wants to react on the incentive point? How can we increase incentives for a certain part of the cloud to be more sustainable, secure, autonomous? How can we create these incentives? Pallas.
I think it's not just about creating the incentives. I think it's more, if you stop looking from only to the next quarter, but take it into a 10-year time frame, and then look at the most important use cases for this issue, then I think we can develop it. I think more the issue is that none of the organizations can do it alone, only if you are as big as Google or Amazon. So I think it's not about an external incentive. It's about the will to entrepreneur and the will to collaborate on this.
Yep, I think that is a good point. But still at the same time, right? So many of the attempts there that we've seen have failed a little bit, right? So this is something. For instance, you could say that if that is the case, why don't we let the state provide a major injection, just like the state invests in infrastructure or the army or education because it's good for society, and then let build this. Let commercial companies build this fantastic new infrastructure. And I think this sounds very attractive. And I looked into this a little bit. For instance, France has put up, 1.8 billion to invest in a secure cloud or so, or trustworthy cloud. And still, it kind of fails. Gaia X kind of failed also because, they realized that they couldn't do without these big tech companies from the US or China. And so while I agree with you, I'm curious how we can overcome that.
By stopping to think in terms of the cloud, which is this big. So if you start, for instance, at something like machine learning, or something like authentication in streaming, or these kind of specific elements, how the streaming, including the energy usage, the authentication, etc. But there will be some next levels coming up to that. And if you, I think, well, maybe this is not the best one, but if we sit together for a while, we find the top 10 use cases and create a model for it.
Sven, you also wanted to react?
Yeah, I think Pallas made an interesting point, but to react on Herbert, there is an IPSI project in the European Union. It's important project of common interest, and that they're literally creating billions to create this European cloud at the moment. So that's very interesting. But if you look at the services side, you also see that I host, for example, a few political parties. They will switch to Office 365, which I find, I don't understand that, not because they're leaving my great service, but from a security autonomous perspective, I wouldn't go there. I would go to something else, and even if that's a very specific service, not AI, not sexy, and they still put it in a foreign state-owned cloud. And a lot of people are doing that. They're not even aware that they do make this decision.
Very interesting. Sven, Max, you want to react on that, or your own point?
I think I would be very worried about this government funding a cloud. I realized actually in the beginning we had this question, what is cloud? I think there's two things we need to look at differently, and this also plays into the incentive question. There's the primitives, the commodities that drive software applications, right? Compute, storage, and network. Those are, in the cloud, the underlying infrastructure. And then you have services that are assembled based on these primitives, based on these very simple resources, so to say. And I'm not opposed. I would actually argue that compute, storage, and network these days is almost a public good. I don't mind Europe spending billions to retrofit existing infrastructure and create a unified marketplace for acquiring compute, storage, and network, because it is a commodity. Nobody really cares about that. The problem is rather that all services today, even services made in Europe, are built on top of the primitives, so the infrastructure of other foreign actors, right? And I think the incentive needs to be placed either to say, well, all services need to run on any infrastructure, so to say. So my train needs to run on every railway in that sense. Or I say I create incentives, for example, by saying if a service provider also connects to a European infrastructure market, then there's a price difference or a cost. It's much more efficient or much more, has a much lower carbon footprint, and I make that more competitive. But from a regulation point of view, this has happened before. This is literally what happened in the energy system, separating the generation side from the retail side, and creating a marketplace in the middle. And I think for these primitives, compute, storage, network, I think with this about time that maybe Europe says, actually, we unbundle this, and Google cannot own the infrastructure and provide the services at the same time, for example. That would be quite a powerful way to basically address this challenge.
Pallas, you work in an energy company that was part of the unbundling, or that was there when the unbundling happened. You probably were there too. What do you think about this idea?
Yeah, I think it's always good to have this infrastructure separated from the services, and I think on a lot of domains you can create this in-between platform where the demand and supply come together in much more than before areas. It will be real time also. So this platform is a new way of regulating almost any domain, I think. And so the platform economy is part of it. And once you have that kind of in-between area, then you can have controls in terms of you can only have access to the market if you comply to the following requirements, which makes it controllable from a democratic perspective. So in the end, this is one of the major elements of policy for the longer future. I think that will be necessary. Yeah, in this.
I want to. Sorry for that, but I interject one more time just to make this really clear. A platform economy. Let's take Airbnb for example. You have supply, you have demand. Airbnb does not own all the apartments nor the space, right? But they do aggregate demand and make it available. If Airbnb would own all the apartments that they're renting, everybody would be like, that seems to be very anti-competitive and that doesn't seem to be like something we want. But in the case of the largest technology companies on this planet, let's take Google, I don't mind saying out the names, they own everything, right? From Google search downward, they own every single component. The software, the infrastructure, the network, they are building their own global fiber networks now. They're creating their own internet providers. They own everything in that chain. And that, from a regulatory perspective, you must unbundle because it's concentration of power in an unprecedented way. If you own every component of the value chain, nobody can compete. In other words, Sven cannot sell Google primitives from his data centers to run Google search or sell Microsoft resources to run Teams. He can't because they own everything themselves and there's no opening to compete. You can't.
Yeah. So if I may quickly respond. So I think it's a good point, and I would be in favor of doing the unbundling. I think it will solve several problems, right? So the great amassing of power in the hands of very few big tech companies. I'm not so convinced that it will actually solve the security problem. So I think the security problem requires major investments in, not just the services, but also the underlying infrastructure. And that needs to come from somewhere. And there are very few companies in the world that could make such investments. And unfortunately, it's the companies such as Google, Microsoft, and the other big, Amazons and so on.
In an example, I said at the platform, the in-between line where demand and supply come together, the Airbnb and Max's example. What you need is not only the unbundling, what you also need is a new type of regulation where you set requirements to the platform to who can access. And if you have that extra, then the issues you are telling about can be solved. If you just put in the minimum layers, minimum requirements on, for instance, security, even before entering the market, then it can be done.
Yeah. So, and in fact, so it cannot be done in a sort of a very general, super large scale. But if you're, taking the approach that you advocated, where you do it on a very targeted basis, perhaps it's actually doable, right? So you're doing this for this particular domain or that particular application. Maybe you can actually do that. Yeah. So, but all I'm saying is that just unbundling will not automatically buy you the things that you need when you're handling really sensitive data, for instance, right? Really sensitive data, which we now could not put on the cloud, or we put on the cloud at our peril.
With that technology, just as a question to you, Herbert, you're proposing more investment in security technology, ultimately, in open source security technology or in proprietary security technology?
Well, I would advocate open source solutions. Yes.
Just to clarify.
Yeah.
Because if then I can add to that, I agree with you 100%. I think it's about, in my opinion, it's about time to recognize that open source software is a public good as well, because it is actually not owned by anybody. It's developed by the community almost always for free. But it is the pillar that builds the entire digital economy. Without open source technology, there would be no company we just discussed. And I think if we could take the IPSAI money from that Sven reported on, the billions and billions for infrastructure, I would pump them into open source software and then also fund investment in security technology and new ways of building cloud software rather than buying servers and building buildings. I think that there's other ways to fund that in a more smarter way.
So does this also mean that we need to be active in, educating those who are in charge, if you will, in what security means, what needs to be done there? I mean, we can always have rules or incentives that upon penalty, you have to implement best practices. But what does that mean? So best practices, if ill formulated or incomplete, will actually be minimally implemented just to fit and not yet be secure, because again, it's becoming an afterthought in the whole system or application. So there is also a component where there is still an enormous amount of misunderstanding, if you will, around what security truly can do for you and what and what it means and what happens if it lacks.
Yeah, let me just applaud that first, and then add to that. I think that we are currently, in fact, whatever best practices we try to limited by whatever is on offer in these infrastructures that are currently available. We have no better choice, right? We cannot give any better security than what is potentially provided by your processors from Intel, AMD, and ARM, and your software stacks from, I don't know, Microsoft or Google or Amazon. That is the best we can do. And that is, in many cases, simply not enough, right? If you really have security-sensitive data, that is simply not enough. But you have no choice, right? So that is something that is problematic whenever we try to regulate. We, going back to what I said earlier, our view of the world is determined what is currently available. And that is, I think, getting in the way of more profound changes that are needed for actual security.
I would add it's certainly not the path to go by. We really need a different path. Where, if security by design, which was the opening sentence, I think, of Martin, if we look from that perspective, it would be certainly not using the best practices from today. And if we go to new types of hardware and software combinations, we need to redesign. That's the only way. So I think the main issue today is that we all seem to think in short-term solutions.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I think
Max also wanted to say, yeah, please.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Just quick. I think there's another aspect that is important, which is, and could also lead to more transparency, and that maybe also would give some more, let's say, points of entry for a crowbar to drive the security discussion, is transparency, right? Because ultimately, what happens inside the cloud, only the cloud knows. So as long as there's no transparency on, for example, the security measures that have been in place, aside from certifications, right? It's very difficult to say what can be done better, or what, where there's let's say where it's not good enough. That's one aspect. And the second one, there was I think, Martin, you touched on educating the people in charge. I think, to be honest, being a person that speaks in front of a lot of politicians all the time, yes, I think that the biggest risk at the moment is that in this soup of, sorry for the language, bullshit of 5G, IoT, AI, data, sovereignty, security, cloud, no policymaker knows what to do. And they don't even understand that a service such as, let's stick to Airbnb, is made up of open source components. They're not a technology company. They're a product or business model innovator. The technology companies are the open source foundations, right? And there's so much that is misunderstood, that I think is really dangerous for any regulation that's currently in the pipeline, of completely going the wrong way to creating something that nobody wants because they didn't understand it to begin with. And honestly, most technology companies exploiting this so to say, this lack of knowledge to further their agenda. Like Google claims that they've been carbon neutral for a decade now because their energy is green. Yeah, but what about the 400,000 servers a year, guys? But policymakers don't get that. They haven't even seen a data center. No. And education on the governance side, absolutely agree. Couldn't be more important than that.
Thanks, Max, for that point. I think we all agree on that point, because there's no player from the government in this room that can contradict it, and also because it's true, probably. We are.
That's why the government is not here.
Probably
in a discussion.
Yeah, I think they want to learn, though. I want to say that they want to know, but you need to give them trustworthy information, right? And that's where also academia, in my opinion, has a role to play. That's the source of, ideally, unbiased opinions and guidance for governments.
Yeah. Sven, I want to give you the floor.
Sure. One of my foundations is a public affairs company, so not a company, foundation. So we talk a lot to members of parliament to educate them. But to give you a perspective, I think from the 150, there are like 15 people more or less interested in digital, and 4 are knowledgeable. So that's a real big issue. Education. That's what we need to do.
I mean, there's a task for us there. It's also a task, I think, for the political parties in this country, right? So if you look at the number of members of parliament that are knowledgeable about digital affairs, I think it's going to be a lower percentage than the percentage that you were talking about, Sven.
I'm a bit optimistic.
To be honest, in the European context, it's the Dutch people in the parliament that are the most progressive when it comes to digital policy. So I do think, like, on an overall, viewpoint, I think the Netherlands are quite progressive in their thinking. I think if you go other countries, for example, where I am from, there's still a lot more work to do on creating that understanding. To be fair.
So we're doing not so badly, Max, from the Dutch perspective. Okay, that's something nice to hear. We take that compliment. Okay.
I want to add something that
Paulus,
in a discussion like this, after a few moments, we all tend to look at the government who isn't here, and they need to change something. But what can we do ourselves?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, Paulus, that was also my last question, or one of the questions I still had. What are the key players that have to propel the development of secure, autonomous, sustainable cloud? We all talked about the government. I think we know what the government has to do, but what are other key players to propel this development, and also maybe put the government or the right people within the government, within political parties, in this driving seat with the right knowledge to make the right decisions?
I would like to say that there is also a big role for the industry itself, because security is not something that will be generated by the users. We don't ask somebody if the electricity is safe. The industry has taken care of that. So the industry itself could also set certain standards and take their role in this one. It's not just the other side, It's even Amazon and Google provide certain basic security layers, not as far as own processor design, but they do offer more and more options to be more secure. And I think that's a good thing.
Yep.
Maybe I can also add something to your question. I think it's very important that the open source community is really going to be behind these types of developments. And I do not see it to be just the Netherlands or Europe. It's for the whole world. Everybody on the whole planet wants to have transparent, secure infrastructures, because it's the data from all the citizens of the whole world. So I see it much more egalitarian, and I'm a little bit worried when I hear all the time about Europe to be autonomous and so forth, sovereign and so forth. It's like European first, like America first. No, I like the world to be first. Can we bring the whole world on the page of, in this case, I would say, guided through a more open community towards this Holy Grail?
Yeah. So I was thinking about who should be in the driver's seat here, and it's difficult actually to point at any particular party besides the government, I think. And I know this is a cheap way out, but I don't see Sven's company taking the lead in this, because they're not the size of Google and they're not the size of Microsoft, right? So you need something that can make things happen on a much larger scale, and I find it difficult to see this at any other level than at least setting the boundaries, right? So from a government perspective, saying this is what we need. We need something. We want to participate in Gaia X. We have our own hub now, but what we really want is something that offers more than Gaia X, namely, this and that. And now we will put out, maybe tenders for people to work on this. Maybe in particular smaller domains. You don't, as Pallas was saying, maybe you don't need to solve all the problems of security in the world in one, humongous cloud. Maybe you do that at particular smaller scale. But I do see a role for the government in there.
Maybe to add to that, I think I also agree with you that the government plays a key role. However, we live in capitalism. The idea of capitalism is to have lean governments that don't actually do much. And now we are asking we want them to fix climate change. We want them to fix inequality. We want them to fix infrastructure. We want them to fix digital inclusion, everything. And it's a bit too much I would not rely on them. Let's put it like this. I think we should ask them all the time, but I think I would not rely on them. I think ultimately Sven described something earlier that I think is a good mental model. Is my customers are going to Office 365. Actually, almost any IT provider that I know has that problem, right? Customers are moving there. They're all moving to the foreign cloud providers. And I think ultimately disruption comes from networks. And I think by bringing all IT companies and providers together across Europe into at least a partial network, and coming up with strategies to overcome this or to compete, I think that could create a relatively large force. And that's ultimately why we choose to create the alliance, because there is enough people in Europe that have a pain from this, that are willing to do something about it. And I think the more people we can bring together, and not just in the Netherlands, but really in Europe, the better it is. And then you can create a force, so to say.
Thank you, Max. Are there any other comments on who should propel the development?
I think we all need to be part of this. For instance, this redesign, in the way we just described today, with open source hardware, with an in-between platform for demand and supply, there are some principles in here. And security by design, but need also be transparent on the sustainability and be able to react upon it. We can make a whole list, and to create such principles of a new design would be a perfect way to start at a university. And then once you have this ultimate goal, and I completely agree, this must be global. This is not just something you do in the Netherlands or in Europe, it must be global. This is one of the first principles. It's open to everybody. And then you can make the first steps in a way that you say, okay, if we do this, there will be a market in the coming few years. And then you can have the normal collaborations, as Max just described as in the capitalist system. Because you need the combinations of getting it all together. These are first steps, but you need to go somewhere where the lights are still on. And it's in this redesign.
Yeah, so I appreciate this vote of confidence, but on a depressing note, our universities have just decided to go to Office 365 also.
So because they didn't know the principles either.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
Oh,
Yeah, you're
you need
absolutely
to
right.
write them first,
Yeah,
But
I don't
what
think
is,
many
but honestly,
people
what is
see.
also the alternative? That's another problem. What's the alternative? Nextcloud?
It's the same thing. But I say the principles of a new design is the same thing as yeah. But when is it good? What are the criteria?
Yeah, and of course also for universities or any organization, the incentives are not really there sufficiently, right? So they will go also for something that is good for their bottom line. The only people I see currently that are really incentivized to take security seriously are the bad guys, right? So cyber criminals, they will actually make an effort to move their computing into cyber bunkers that cannot be touched by anybody. There, they actually do take it seriously.
Wow.
Source of inspiration to us all.
Maybe they have to propel the development then. They are the primary stakeholder.
Yeah, we should ask for investment, yes.
Yes. I have one comment.
Their money.
Oh, sorry, Max, please.
No, just one very small note, Herbert. It's really not the bottom line. Go ask your university people. It's convenience. They don't have to manage the infrastructure. There are no servers. It just works. They just click 3 buttons and it works. And they don't have to scale it. It's convenience. We really have to get that straight because the cloud is not, these services are not cheaper. They're not. They're more expensive. I think Sven knows this. I know this. It's convenience that is the driving force.
Sven agrees. I see it.
Yes,
It
is convenience.
Yes. Do you want to add something also to that, Sven, or just confirm it?
No, it's just to confirm it. Yeah,
Very good. Yeah, thank you very much. Because we're already also moving to the end of the panel discussion. I think it was a very fruitful discussion. I have one comment of Catherine Nachtwey. She says, I personally think that there is a great lack of communication, awareness, and knowledge exchange between the central stakeholders, from the consumers, media, and tech companies to the government. José van Dijk says, convenience is the enemy of critical thinking about the internet. I see Pallas nodding.
On both of them, yes.
Saying yes, sorry.
Yeah, so I think we, in both cases, we need to have a story that really compels. And I think the ingredients for that story came along today.
Is there anybody who wants to say some final words on this discussion? To capture the essence of this discussion, it's a very important task. Maybe I can ask Herbert Bos to briefly summarize the discussion from your perspective, Herbert, because you already did it a few times. So maybe you can do the final summary.
Yeah, so what I think we've heard is, from a number of different perspectives, more or less the same comments, right? So there are, for different players, very few incentives to really push and invest into security. And the incentives that we actually do see are, costs and efficiency, and the demand by customers are also driven partially by that. So since we lack these incentives, and since the only parties that have sufficiently deep pockets to even make these investments, things are kind of at a stalemate, and we're having many parties waiting for each other, and very few things are currently possible in terms of change. And the way to solve this, I don't know, but definitely pushing this, educating our policymakers, talking, having more communication between the different stakeholders, as Catherine was suggesting, is, I think, definitely a good way. And starting maybe smaller, as Pallas was suggesting, is actually maybe also a good starting point, right? Have something that to get us going, and once we have it in one particular application domain, that might actually be an incentive for others to also look at this solution. So I don't know. I'm not sure whether I summarized it, but that's how I interpreted the.
I think you did a pretty good job, and you also took into account the comments of the participants. So on that final words, I want to close the session, but not before I say big thanks to Sven, Marten, Max, Herbert, and Pallas for joining us, providing the inputs and the discussion. For the other participants, now it's time to return to the lobby and to go to the next session that will probably start at 3 o'clock. And thank you very much for attending this session, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.